You haven't mastered books, poetry, or prose, but you are a spirit the world can't live without. Everything you do is amazing. Everything you do is real. You show me. You show me. You show me perfection. Perfection. How great these other people are with me today. And how great all of you are showing up. This is a collective that's coming together, and not even coming together just today, but around our globe. There's this coming together that Maria talked about. It's time to work together. And my inspiration for today is thinking about what is it that keeps us from working together and from visioning together. What is it that keeps us from that? Because I think the natural state of things is wholeness, whole people, individuals, and whole collective as well. So thanks for both Maria and Judy bringing that into the room so far.
I love that. So I just wanted to say there's over 50 people in the room already. And because of the format, we can't see everybody's faces. So I would love it if people could just actively chat in the little chat room. Hopefully everybody knows how to do that on Zoom. But hopefully this is sort of active engagement. And Fiorella, I don't know if you could help us watch the chat. So if people say something, you could just dive in.
Yeah, jump in, Fiorella, anytime.
Yeah, because it's hard to sort of see the chat and sort of keep everything in the screen at the same time.
Yeah. So interrupting is fine. Let's start the program. You think, Peggy?
Yeah.
Make sure we get the time rolling, and let's start the program. And we're going to really encourage participation, sharing your insights. We're going to start off by introducing the folks that are here today, and then get into a little bit of a presentation, some visuals to share, some exercises we're going to do, and taking questions and comments and insights from you. So let's all start by taking a deep breath. Let's get grounded together. Breathing in tenderness, appreciation. Breathing out the past, stress, tension. Breathing in hopes, dreams. Breathing out frustration, self-criticism. Just becoming really present with what's happening right here. What you're feeling in your body, in your hands, your feet, in your belly. What kind of emotions you're feeling right now? Whether there's nervousness or calm, joy or difficulty, frustration. Let it be, let it come and go. So thank you for joining today. This is the Igniting a Synchronicity Tornado of Change for 2022. And I'm here today with Peggy Lou and Brian the Healer. Brian, there you are. Great to have you both here. And Fiorella is helping us organize and stay connected to each other today. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
You sound great.
Great. So let me talk a little bit about the folks that we have in the room today. So Peggy Lou, I met on Clubhouse, and Brian the Healer, I met on Clubhouse. And I wanted to bring them together to do a conversation talking about our dreams and our visions and how we get there, because I approach things from the physics perspective, and I'm really also inspired by my spiritual path and by the green environmental path, the political work that needs to be done in the world right now. And that's what Brian and Peggy do. They bring together the spiritual seeking and the environmental activism and work that I really value. So I wanted to bring them together, all three of us, talking really about the same thing from different angles. And so let me tell you about Peggy Lou. Peggy Lou's superpower is connecting people to bring in a better future faster. As chairperson of JUCCE, JUCCCE, the Joint US-China Cooperation on Clean Energy, Peggy is a leading environmentalist who has helped China leapfrog toward personal and planetary health. She was awarded the Nobel of Climate Change, called the Hillary Step. The Economist magazine called her one of the most innovative thinkers in Asia. And she was named the Green Goddess of China by Chinese press and Hero of the Environment by Time magazine. And she successfully catalyzed change for over 1 billion people, 7 times over. She now shares the lessons she's learned in successfully tackling China's toughest environmental challenges. Peggy's tornado leadership methodology, tornado leadership we're going to talk about today, draws from her work across policy, economic, technical, and spiritual realms to lead these societal scale changes. And you can find her bio in the chat. We'll get it there. And Fiorella, let me know if you have any trouble accessing any of that, those links. Thank you so much. And Brian Baruch, spiritual teacher, clairvoyant, Brian the healer. Let me tell you a little bit about Brian. Brian is a spiritual teacher, a clairvoyant, a healer of mind, body, and spirit, an intergenerational trauma specialist. Brian Baruch is the ambassador to Soul, spiritual counsel to the sovereign Hawaiian state nation. I really want to hear about that work, Brian. Brian Baruch, ambassador to Soul, has dedicated himself to teaching about the power of love and our powerful and our universal spiritual heritage. With lessons that kindle the soul, his words transform pain into passion and passion into profound intimacy. His lessons address the mysteries to the soul and impart keys to transcending the human condition. Brian's distinct approach to creativity, inner development, and devotional intimacy engages you to embrace your spiritual path with the ecstatic passion of a love story. So welcome, Peggy. Welcome, Brian. And I'm Sky Nelson Isaacs. I'm a physicist, speaker, musician, and author. I'm going to read from my notes about myself here. So I was raised among the study and practice of integral yoga from Sri Swami Satchidananda. And I started the Synchronicity Institute, an organization which engages in research and training on wholeness, synchronicity, and flow. I've recently published a paper that focuses on wholeness. So I study wholeness from a scientific perspective. I want to place synchronicity on a scientific foundation as well. And the main idea of wholeness, there's so many different ways to approach wholeness, personally and scientifically. But what we're going to talk about today in terms of space and time is that the end of something actually determines or influences what's happening in the middle along the way. So we usually think of causality as front to back or beginning to end causality. And when you talk about wholeness, you've got things that are affected as a whole. Just like when something changes in your life that's important, you change as a whole. Your whole life can change in response to changes going on around you. And similarly, when you have a particle going through a trajectory on a particle detector, a particle accelerator, the end point of that particle determines what actually happened along the way. So these are the kind of questions which inspired me in physics to ask these deeper questions about wholeness. So you can find more information about my work at synchronicityinstitute.com. And I think we're ready to get started with just maybe some, I want to share 2 organizations that I want to highlight today. One is the Blue Warriors, Reversing Climate Change, Planting Trees to Restore African Wildlife Habitat. Blue Warriors is run by Pep Ciernal, someone I met in one of my workshops, and she's planting trees around the globe, specifically in Africa. And she writes, well, you can go to find her work at www.bluewarriors.net. She writes, "The whole planet is our home. The world is more interconnected than ever before. Therefore, we need to support indigenous communities around the world in order to mitigate climate change and contain contagious diseases such as COVID, MERS, and Ebola before they become pandemics and affect the rest of the world. This should be the main lessons from COVID. We fundamentally believe that human beings are capable of doing anything they set their mind to. Based on this belief, I declare that we shall reverse climate change. We will do this by collaborating with all people and all organizations in the world to make this happen. We live in an era where climate change affects all walks of life, and we are in this together. So check out www.bluewarriors.net. And I'd also like to turn your attention to Masterclass this month, because at masterclass.com, they have the free access to 3 programs for Black History Month. Black History, Black Power, and Black Love. 3 different programs that are free. And this is really important educational material. So you can go to learn.masterclass.com/Black History Month and sign up right now. So those are just 2 items that are relevant to what we're doing today, important aspects of education for us and helping the planet. So turning it over to Peggy and Brian a little bit. Welcome to the stage. Thank you for joining today. I hope I did you well in your introductions.
Yes, thank you, Sky. Thanks for having us. Looking forward to this.
Brian, just to make sure we can hear you. Yeah, we got you there. Okay, good. So I want to start with this topic of what is synchronicity? How do we look for it? And how does it fit into a model of change management? That's sort of how we're going to begin. What is synchronicity? How to look for it? And how does it fit into a model of change management? Now, to get to that question, I want to set a little context. Folks who are familiar with my work know that I study synchronicity. I study space and time. And space and time are really the foundation for me as a scientist of all the physical, things that could happen. So synchronicity is a coincidence in space and time. It's an alignment in space and time. And so let me share a couple of slides to give you a visual on what I mean when I talk about the wholeness of space and time. What we're going to do is we're going to share a few slides of mine and then share a few slides of Peggy's. And as we go, we're going to talk about some fundamental questions that we put in the promotional materials. What is synchronicity? How to look for it? How does it fit into a model of change management? What is the difference between creator and victim? How do we create from the future instead of the past? So these are the questions we'll get to today. So igniting a synchronicity tornado of change for 2022. The model for change that's coming together with just the 3 of us that are here sharing today is both science and business and spiritual. So we've got the science of space and time, business and collective change management, and spiritual, mystic, eternal. But it's amazing because there's all these 3 different areas of our lives, right, of our world, that are actually speaking the same language, or maybe different vocabulary, but we can bring them together into a common language. And that's really what my vision is for today, to show that there's really just one message here. And for me, I think of wholeness as important because it can transform human nature through a scientific understanding of our connectedness. So we can have open conversations about polarization, privilege, equity, empowerment, justice, and climate change. And climate change being the focus of today's work. So I want to get across this basic idea of wholeness of space and time. And the idea of a hologram is the visual that I think really works to convey this. You've probably heard before that there's a macrocosm within each microcosm, that the whole is contained in the parts. And a hologram captures this idea. You take a piece of film, and instead of putting it in a camera where you have a lens, you just allow it to be exposed to the scene that you're trying to photograph. So you take a tree, you put a piece of film by it, you let the light fall on it very carefully. And then when you go and you develop it and you put it in a dark room and you shine a laser on that film, like I have here, what you see is an image of the tree, 3-dimensional. You see it as if it was really there in front of you, kind of like floating in space. And so there's it's kind of a quirky technical thing. It's kind of cool. People think that's pretty interesting. You see it on your credit cards. the little icon in the top right that's a hologram. But what's really profound about this is the wholeness that it embodies. Because look at the following example. If I break apart the hologram and shine a laser on one piece, I get a picture of the whole tree. Now that picture of the tree will be blurrier. It's not identical. It will lose resolution. It's not, it needs the other parts to come together to form the whole tree, or the highly resolved tree. But the key idea is that the whole tree, the whole extent of the tree, the branches, the trunk, the apples, they're all there in each piece. And if I shine a laser on the bottom piece, I see the same thing from a different angle. So what each piece captures is its angle on the tree. So similarly, we are like living in this hologram where we each have a perspective on the whole. The macrocosm shows up in each of us. And the whole hologram needs all of our perspectives working together to give the full high resolution image. If we don't combine our pieces together, we don't get a high resolution image. We get just a fuzzy image from our perspective. So for me, it's inspiring to remind myself that even when I feel like I'm certain and complete in my knowledge and understanding of something, that I only have this fuzzy perspective, and somebody else has a different perspective that's also fuzzy. And when we put our perspectives together, our pieces together, we get a bigger hologram. It's the relationship working together that creates the clarity. And synchronicity is like that macrocosm within the microcosm. Everything that happens is synchronicity. We're going to do a little exercise a little bit later about looking at yourself, at your life, and noticing that everything that you're doing, everything that's happening to you in your life is part of the synchronistic flow. It's everything that happens is reflecting an underlying pattern. So the underlying pattern is that hologram. And when you go to the grocery store and you bump into somebody and you drop your wallet, that's reflecting, how are you in that situation versus how are you when you get a bill in the mail versus how are you when you find out that your kid has to miss school for a day and you have to stay home from work. Or all of these situations are just different opportunities to reflect the macrocosm within each of us. And so synchronicities are every event in our life that's challenging us to show up in a new way, in our best possible way. So everybody familiar with a rainbow? Anybody not like rainbows? Who likes a rainbow? So a rainbow is a beautiful example of wholeness, because when light shines from behind you from the sun and it shines down onto the clouds and bounces to your eyes, it spreads into the colors. And the reason it does that is because of the different wavelengths of light. So when you see light bouncing off the clouds and you see red of the rainbow, it's really white light minus the blue and minus the green. You're not creating red light there. You're actually taking white light and removing the blue and the green. And same when you look at the green, you're removing the red and the blue to reveal the green that's already there. So I think that this idea of carving away from wholeness is really important, because we were reminded that we start from wholeness and we carve away what doesn't serve us. Carve away the pieces that we don't want to continue with. We don't have to add them in. We don't have to become something we're not. And this is part of what we're bringing to this conversation with Brian and Peggy. How do we start from this different perspective where we begin whole and we empower our inner soul, our inner self to come to the forefront, to come out as that white light. So I think I'll jump ahead a little bit. I want to show you one more visual here, and then we'll jump into some dialogue with Peggy and Brian. Time is also exists as a whole. You have the extent of 8 minutes between the sun, a photon leaving the sun and traveling to Earth. In that 8 minutes, it looks like it spreads out in time, it expands, but it's really that end point when you see the light that it determines what path it took. So I want you to think about in your life when you experience something, a synchronicity or a connection with somebody, What did it take to bring them to that point with you? When you meet somebody at the grocery store, what did it take for them to show up at that point in your life, to meet you there? And think about that whole journey for them happening in that moment as a whole, falling into place as a whole. Really, this 8 minutes of time for the light traveling from the sun is indeterminate until we make a decision. And the key takeaway for me is that we're here to make decisions. We're here to choose, not to create the path, but that the path already exists as this timeline, this story, this movie that we're all part of. And we're choosing as we go and determining all of the paths that come together. And this is why synchronicity plays such a fundamental role in my philosophy. It's the synchronicities that happen which allow us to guide ourselves through that maze of choices to make choices that really are life affirming and help us heal. So I'm going to pass it over to Brian and Peggy to, we can go into slides right now, but let's pause for a minute and just have a little dialogue about where we're at so far. And if there's any questions from folks or clarity, you can feel free to jump in.
Nice slides, Guy.
Thank you.
The artist in you is coming out. When I was thinking about this yesterday, I was listening to this theoretical physicist named Sean Carroll, and he doesn't believe in life after death. And so he was talking a little bit about the different states of, or the different aspects of reality. And what was interesting was the response from a Buddhist scholar. I think his name was like Alan Wallace. And he said, look, there's 3 ways that he's looking at reality that are slightly different than the way that he looks at reality. So I thought I would bring these up because they're words that I think are quite important in terms of the perspective that some people have versus where we're coming into this workshop, what the assumptions that we're using are. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really important. I think everybody here is sort of self-selected into this workshop. So I believe I'm going to present something that everybody believes is true, but you're welcome to put into the chat, a difference of opinion. So the first one is that Sean, the theoretical physicist, talks about how the future uniquely follows from the present. So there's basically a one-way highway. So this is determinism. So for me, I'm obsessed, really obsessed, I think, with trying to create a theory of everything, of energy as well, but theory of everything.
Yeah.
And so tornado leadership is one aspect of, it's one framework that I've come up with for myself to understand everything. I teach a class called Quantum Manifestation, which is sort of a little bit of what Sky talks about, theoretical physics. It's a little bit about my Qigong practice, what I learned at MIT as an electrical engineer, as a programmer in computer science. And so for me, tornado leadership, in contrast to determinism, and Brian likes to say this, that future can affect the present and the past. So reality is more like a two-sided highway. So back and then forth. So I think that's really, really important to say that all 3 of us believe in this assumption that you can have the past, present, and future. They all exist now, and you can actually affect the present from the future. That's really important for all 3 of our perspectives of our work. 2 is realism, that there is this concept that there's a real world that's out there, and then there's us. We observe the real world, and they're sort of insular. They're isolated. They're not connected. And I believe that I'm speaking for all 3 of us, that we believe everything is a fractal. So the inner world is a fractal of the outer world, and vice versa. So nothing is independent of each other. So I think that the thing that you posed is at the very beginning is like, how do we create more connection? So that's a really important question. And then the third one is this idea of physicalism, that everything that exists is physical. So it's the particles that we see and nothing beyond that. So everything that we might call eternal, ethereal, spirit, that's invisible, they're not a separate essence that's distinct from matter, but it only arises from this interplay of, within this very extraordinarily complex system. For me, and certainly Brian and Sky, again, I hopefully speaking correctly for all three of us, we believe that there is a spiritual dimension. There's a multi extra dimensional factor beyond the physical dimension. And the physical dimension is just sort of a cross section or a projection, sort of like a 2D shadow of our 3D world. So I think it's really important that as we talk about things like tornado leadership, this framework that I've come up with, that I'm writing a second book now on, about how do you bring in a better future faster for the collective, that we understand these really key assumptions, because if you don't, then I think a lot of things get lost. So Sky and Brian, feel free to jump in and add to that.
Well, thank you, Peggy. One thing I would like to make accessible for everyone is the difference between the classical concepts of fate versus destiny. From a philosophical standpoint, I'll make the distinction. Fate means a certain thing is going to happen, and it's predicated, as Peggy said, in a deterministic construct, meaning something that happened before is going to predetermine that this event is eventually going to happen. Destiny, however, is a different construct whereby you are a steward, you are driving the direction of where you are headed or what you are creating. Now, what Peggy described as a two-way lane of causality, meaning that our supposition here is that creation is not just a continuum of past events, cause and effect to the present and to the eventual future, but that there is a future awareness that has hindsight, that has a more practice, that is a bit more genius, that wants you to be it faster. This idea in the spiritual tradition that awareness has a circulation of wholeness, as Sky would refer to it, but that circulation of wholeness as well has awareness. And there is a future you that's waiting to become you. And that you have the ability to take overall causality, to not create with what was before, but to be inspired by what will become. And in doing so, you open up an entirely new construct, a new causality, a new, perhaps inspirational approach where you can intuitively be guided to gentler pastures.
I love that. Hopefully the spotlight worked. Sky, did that work?
It did, yeah. I thought that was
Okay.
that was a good choice.
Awesome.
Can we do that automatically?
Well, I clicked on his name and then it hit spotlight, so I don't know if
You look
when
good,
I
Brian.
speak.
Yeah, I like
so
that. I like that feature, and
Awesome.
I love what you said, both of you. I do agree with all three of your principles, Peggy. And I love that we're taking this conversation really into, to me, is the key of our intersection. You know, how do we create from this future expectation? I use this term, anticipated qualitative experience, to describe, it's the only words I can come up with to describe what synchronicity, how it operates. We have this anticipation of an experience we want to have. The experience is, I want to be satiated for dinner. And so we anticipate what kind of food we're going to have, and then we make that happen. But we don't just make it happen ourselves. Someone shows up in our life to, cook us dinner, or to get us to suggest we go out to eat, or brings by some food that we can make ourselves, or we find something that's delicious in the fridge to make ourselves. Like all these elements come together to allow our anticipation to be fulfilled of the experience we want to have. And it's the experience is the apples that I place on that tree that I was showing you earlier. The apples are determining sort of the pole. My version of what you're talking about, Brian, I think, is this apple tree, where the apples are determining the pole from the future, weighing down the probability of the branches to bring us the synchronicities, which are leading us down that pathway. And the apples are placed there by our intentions. And I'm actually not sure what the words would be here. Maybe we could talk about that. But in my way of talking about it is that the apples are placed on that tree by our intentions, whether conscious or unconscious, of what we are anticipating.
So Sky, if I might jump to the last slide for the nation of Hawaii, I just wanted to start with a story that's sort of practical, on the ground illustration of how we can bring in a better future faster. Yeah, so this is Brandon Makaavaava on the left, and Uncle Puanua Dennis Kanahele on the right. And Brandon is the deputy head of state for the nation of Hawaii. Uncle is the head of state for the nation of Hawaii. And this is 45 acres in this beautiful land within Oahu called Waimanalo. And they have been trying to, for almost 25 years now, trying to create a sovereign nation ever since Bill Clinton signed an apology law to basically recognize what had happened with colonialism, that over 1 million acres was taken from them. And obviously 45 acres is nothing, but they've been really going from, tense protesting on the beach of Waimanalo to trying to settle some residents in, magnetize more citizens, build a dignified sovereign nation. And so I want to tell you this story because it gives you an idea of what is possible. And so you can turn that slide off. Thank you, Sky. So some of you on Clubhouse have possibly sat in on some of our Clubhouse events, workshops with the nation of Hawaii, where we've brought in different experts from around the world, world-leading experts, to help build up 10 pillars that are really essential for nation building. So imagine if you were sort of in the wild, wild west, back when America was still, sort of wild and prairies, and, you had the opportunity to start building a nation completely from scratch. This is the opportunity that we have today. But it also is starting from very few resources other than land and water. And so we're working on power so that they can be off the grid, affordable housing, education. We just got certification to create a university there, and so on and so forth. I mean, you name it, we're starting from scratch. Even the very acts for, creating the law of the nation. What are the rules of governance? Who do you bring in as a citizen? So it's a really fascinating project for me, because I, since 2007, have been working very closely with a variety of ministers in China, and over 1,000 mayors in China, to help them build cities, help them go green. And I've seen China go from literally like putt-putt choo-choos to the leader in high-speed rails in 2012, like very, very quickly, within less than a generation, less than 20 years. So I know that it's possible if you put your, oh yes, actually there's that picture of the choo-choo train, I think. Yeah, that one. So this is literally a picture of the same person in China 26 years apart. Right. So that is just an incredible one single snapshot of how China has changed and what is possible in reality, what I have literally lived through. Maybe if you go to the next slide, there should be another picture Go to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I accidentally
Might have been
put
before.
these are all hidden slides that weren't supposed to show up.
Oh, well,
Sorry.
they're great slides. I
Maybe,
I learned a lot by watching them.
Okay, these were all supposed to be hidden. Sorry. Keep going. Keep going. There's some okay. This is an example of pictures of cities and airports that actually exist today. And maybe if you go to the next slide, it'll show some pictures in the 1980s. These are urban planning museums that every single major city now has, showing what their city is going to look like in 20 years. Maybe the next slide will have a picture of what it used to look like. Maybe next slide.
I know where that is.
Okay.
These ones?
Yeah, well, yeah. This is a project that I did in 2010, when I realized that we need to get Chinese to live sustainably, to care about the environment, not just consume like Americans, because China at that time, disposable income was 1/10 of Americans. But if we rapidly grow our economy and we live like Americans and waste like Americans, then the whole planet is just going to be totally screwed. So this was an idea to create a new story of prosperity. What does prosperity look like for Chinese people that embeds sustainable concepts? So these are just aspects of life sort of before and after. So if you can go forward. Yeah, so that's a picture that I took on the left that's outside my window, not filtered, from my iPhone. And so, you know, the idea is like, hey, don't we all want to just have a livable China? And this is an ad that I placed in a government ad. And you can go to the next slide. We did a lot of these ads, and then we were in Vogue, to government magazines. Tom Friedman in New York Times covered my organization's initiative, China Dream. And the next slide.
China Dream, yeah.
Yeah, this is another cover story, the power of the China Dream. And then Xi Jinping ends up saying the words China Dream in his first speech in 2012. So the next slide shows this becoming the national slogan. So now everywhere, in every city, on murals, subway ads, everywhere, it's all about the China Dream, my dream. But what's interesting about this dream is that it embeds by default green grass, blue skies, environmental responsibility, accountability. Is your dream. It's not just somebody else's dream or the nation's dream, it's my dream. So
this is so beautiful. And I think where we're going and what we can do in the rest of this time period together is talk about dreaming. I know that's an important part of your work, Peggy and Brian, together. And I want to have you be able to give your tornado leadership some airtime here, some strategies. Does that sound like where we're going?
Yeah,
here?
I just wanted to show people like right now, these lessons that China went through, that I've now put into this framework, tornado leadership, is being taken by communities, much smaller communities like the nation of Hawaii, to now ramp up their scaling to a large nation. So even
it's amazing.
It's hasn't even been a year, but we've been able to bring in worldwide experts, and they've really got this momentum, what I call angular momentum of a tornado.
I love that.
So that's really exciting.
Yeah. And you know, the pictures you have here are so inspiring, and it's amazing what you've accomplished in terms of connecting people together and bring, you know, a big part of what I've heard you talk about is bringing people into the vortex, like generating that enthusiasm. I love the notion of a tornado because it's out of control in a sense, but it has this energy that transforms, that affects things. So are we ready to go back to the slides where you talk about some of those details?
Yeah, you can go to the first slide of tornado leadership. There's just 3 slides. I want to preface this by saying, you know, I'm a MIT electrical engineer, computer science major. I'm super brain, logical, rational. That's how I was trained. I went to McKinsey, so I was just really in the business framework. But in college, my father brought me into a Qigong practice, South Shaolin Inner Energy One Finger Zen Qigong practice, which is basically the birthplace of all martial arts in China. And these two worlds for me were really different. They were very separated. But what I realized was my subconscious was really telling me that everything is about energetics. It's not about the plans, the white papers, the scenario, the business plans, the success metrics, the KPIs, which I got really good at in business. But as I started to help change China and green China, what I realized was actually being able to move from thinking to sensing energy alignment is actually the key to bringing in the future at warp speed versus, what I think is maximum speed is the Moore's law, Silicon Valley,
Right.
exponential technological progress.
Doubling every
But
18 months or something like that. That would be exponential fast.
Today we need a lot faster progress if we're going to deal with things like inequity, the environment, climate change, et cetera. We just need warp speed, Dorothy from Kansas to Oz. And so
hence the tornado.
Right? Yeah. So hence the tornado, and really it's borrowing biomimicry, the nature of the wind.
Mhm.
And it's all about building angular momentum. And so I'm not going to go into these details because I'm happy to do more and more of these tornado leadership workshops, but I just want to show you in nature, there is this phenomena that everybody thinks is a destructive phenomena, the tornado, because they're worried about sort of the flattening of whole towns. They just see the grief that it leaves behind. But actually, if you look at the tornado as the beginning of a toroid, a torus, it's actually a creative force.
Mm-hmm.
So the ending is actually a beginning. It is both destruction and creation in a single breath, right, of wind. And so what I'm trying to show people is that you can harness this tornado energy to change the way your organization works and learn that you can do things collectively, not in a controlled top-down way, but collectively, just by holding the resonance of the future in the center of the tornado. You can spin the tornado with micro learnings, micro celebrations, micro asks. And then you can harness this. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a picture of a sorry, all the hidden slides.
It's my fault.
Okay.
So I think you got to go back.
Yeah, just go to the next slide, which is harnessing the tornado.
I don't think it's there.
Keep going forward.
It comes to the China.
Oh, really? Maybe at the end of the China stuff, there's the harnessing.
I'm pretty sure
there's a picture of a toroid. If you can imagine a donut in your head.
Let's go with the visual.
Okay, if you can just imagine this toroid in your head, and you see basically from the center, the void of the donut, the hole of the donut, that's singularity point, right? That's the nothingness. And then all of a sudden you see the spiral that comes out, and then it goes around like a solenoid around the edges of this toroid, but the toroid is spinning, right? So that beginning, that creation from that white hole is a tornado. That's the beautiful thing is that if you know how to harness a tornado, you're essentially a creator. You're acting as, a fractal of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
the macrocosm and the microcosm.
Yes. I'm going to stop there because Brian has been helping me all along the way sort of understand the more higher nuanced spiritual aspects of the tornado that I've experienced from work, from changing China 7 times, the internet, 1 time. I've experienced this. So I'm able to create this sort of framework that a business person might be able to understand in a structured way, in a logical way. But Brian has a way to talk about this in a much more nuanced spiritual way from his mystical practice.
Yeah,
so I'll stop there.
Jump in.
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Sky. So as a caveat, I just want to relate that I'm a clairvoyant, and I'm able to channel energy and do healing, not just in person, physical, emotional, and energetic healing, like with the nation of Hawaii, to actually change their karma energetically by reverse engineering 5 generations of trauma. What happened in the past, the trauma we create with, all of that is a fatalistic force that results in a deterministic pattern that is codependent on that trauma and the resistance to it. So Sky, who's a scientist essentially, recognizes that nature is a byproduct of one force meeting an opposite force. That causes stasis. Now, as a clairvoyant who heals people, places, animal life, and earth, what I'm here to relate to you is that there's awareness of us that's very much alive in the future, that has a lot more experience than we do, that has done it the course corrective, violent zigzag approach, backwards and forwards and overcompensation, and wants to extend to us a direct path, a synergistic path. You may have heard some people talk about their interest in past life regression. Well, as a teacher, I facilitate and teach future self progression. What Peggy is doing for societies is she is helping people maintain the heart coherence, so to speak, the web address, the resonance web address for the future destination, and reverse engineer from there. In that torque, in that spin that she's describing, synergy begins to take root, because you're holding a circuit, a bridge, a connectivity to the future outcome. And in that bandwidth, the future awareness that is you is preparing the very steps, the very bridge for you to step upon as you emerge into your future self. And so, Sky, what you and Peggy are both converging over in this instant is the idea that there's a future outcome and a heightened awareness and a more elegant pathway of doing things that is in the future. And we don't have the time to learn the hard way from cause and effect, error, and course correction. We want a shortcut to quantum leap into the future, a universal future, where synergistically the path has been prepared for us. What I'm here to say as a clairvoyant is that that is eminently possible. We are capable of taking the quantum leap by changing our relationship with time itself. When we begin to relate to our future self as much as we relate to our past self, we open up the bandwidth for that heart coherence for the present now. In that space, you can dream while awake, and those dreams are destiny.
So I want to talk about the multiverse. I hear you talking about the multiverse here, this ever-present tree of branching possibility that we're dreaming towards. And I hear you talking about, I'm so inspired by the words you choose, because they make me want to take a deep breath. Instead of rushing forward with plans from my brain about how to fix things that come really from my past experience, all the cause and effect learning that I've had, they make me want to drop in and meditate a little bit about who is already there that's calling me forward, the me that's already there. And it gives me, I spend some time worrying about if I will become the person I want to be. I don't know if anybody else has that experience, but I know sort of what I want to grow into, and I worry if I will get there sometimes. But the picture here is this multiverse of the story that already exists of our lives. That's many branched, many faceted. And rather than creating it from here forward, it's already there and we're relating to it. Is that right? We're connecting
Yeah.
to it.
I love
That-
that, Scott. I'm going to talk a little bit about something called the law of availability that I use in my work. And this is different than the law of manifestation for those of you who are law of attraction fans, because the law of manifestation, which is will sky A today be sky B in the future, doesn't exist with the law of availability, because that assumes that there is a separation, of space and of time. Whereas with the law of availability, the way that I look at a reality is that all infinite realities exist now. There are infinite realities that exist now. And you're a little bit like a hair comb, and the different realities are the different spines, right? You're on edge. This is you. And so you can choose to jump to any one of these realities because they're already available to you, law of availability. All you have to do is prioritize your attention on it. And so for me, that gives me a lot of comfort, huge amount of comfort. It's like believing in life after death. Gives me a lot of comfort. And then it's like, well, how do I jump? That was my next big question. It's like, okay, if I believe that everything is available, how do I jump? So there, I believe in potential and kinetic energy. I believe if everything is energy, including physical matter is just a slower standing wave form of energy, then there is infinite amount of energy, of resonance, of an energetic fingerprint. So every single form of reality or snapshot of reality, a page in your flip book, is an energetic fingerprint. It has a unique energetic fingerprint. So what you're trying to do is tap into that resonance, right? So how do you actually tap into that resonance and call it forth from potential energy to make it active, to make it non-dormant, not potential, but active and kinetic? It's really, like you said briefly, Sky, thought. It's about intention. It's so every single time you basically follow your curiosity into a reality, an energetic fingerprint, you're essentially creating details of that reality. A little bit like I like to say James Cameron did with the movie Avatar, the world of Avatar. He put so much detail into that reality that it became more real to the protagonist than the sort of pod that he was living in, right? In his quote unquote real reality. And so for me, a lot of the work that I do at a collective level, like the China Dream workshops that we sort of flipped through, even though there were hidden slides, we flipped through.
Good.
I did a lot of those workshops in China. And then I went on to Pakistan and UK and nation of Hawaii, et cetera. And I did the same workshops. And it's collectively, if you're an architect, you might use the word charrette. So it's basically storytelling in detail, the future reality that you want. And that creates a joy, a euphoria, a resonance of that. If you follow wonder, it creates a density. It crystallizes, right, the ether into plasma, into physical matter. And that's when you then are jumping from one spine of reality to another on this hair comb. So my work is really about how to jump from one reality to another that already exists. It already exists.
The model of a tree, I want to just put in people's minds again. It's branching from here into the future and also back into the past. It comes together. And this is what quantum mechanics says about the wave function, is that it does this. It branches into many possibilities, and those exist in a multiverse. Every branch is a different version of what could have happened. But it is true, they all exist. Just like you go to the movies, you don't actually think in like, Star Wars that you're not sure is Luke Skywalker going to have a future or not. Like, that the future of the movie is already happening. The future of the movie was created when the movie was made, but you're experiencing it in order, in time. So I want to just put that visual out there that you're experiencing something right now, which is part of a bigger thing that already exists in the multiverse. And what I hear you saying, Peggy, is, for me, what's really moving is when I shift my mindset, which is both my mind and my heart and my body sensations, my maybe Brian, you can speak about trauma response, how all of that is connected. And when I feel the joy of a future that I envision, that joy pulls me forward. It pulls me into action, which is productive and creative. And so there's a real value, like an actual quantification that can be made of like why it's important to feel joy, because it's what brings us to that dream. Am I right?
So Sky, you're touching on something very important. In the mystical tradition, there's an idea that in the future, we will be sovereign. There'll be true sovereignty. The understanding here is that our hearts, they're desensitized. We are not creating with pure sound in our hearts. We're creating with the reverb most of the time. And what we are reverbing to is a hardening, a trauma of sorts, a disconnect. We're feeling out in form, compensating for difficulties, for harshness, for trauma. As we resensitize our hearts, as we learn to get to the true sound, as we start to feel the vitality, the surge of awe and awesomeness of pure awareness that we started out with before socialization, as we learn to create with that, what I call the little dot of awareness, then something very interesting happens. And I witnessed this as a clairvoyant. That little dot goes to the heart and it opens up a little dot right between the eyes. And what that little dot between the eyes that opens up, that in many traditions they call it a third eye, it's actually a third perspective. It's the circulatory system of the universe, the circulatory system of existence. That's what Sky's talking about when he speaks about wholeness. That wholeness is the circulation, not where we're stuck in the friction of the different body parts, but the circulatory system's taking care of the entire body. It has no preference for any one body part. We as awareness and humanity on a circulatory system level are fully connected to our future outcome and the healthiest fulfillment and future. So as we resensitize our hearts to the level of sensitivity and trueness of the future, of our future self, then we too become the antenna. We're able to dream while awake. We're able to attract the data, the inspiration to guide us on the most direct path. And that's hardwired into Peggy's tornado leadership, is to attune the heart, almost like when I was a child. Children used to play mazes, try to start in the beginning, they get into lots of walls. And then one boy, he had an older brother who showed him, if you start from the end of the maze, you get to the beginning in no time. What Peggy is trying to do is teach societies how to start from the end of the maze and work your way backwards so that you will be sensitized to see what's an opportunity, to see, to recognize what is synergy. Because synergy is happening all the time. Synchronicity is there if you have a heart to feel it.
Right, and I think this was a good time to talk about the nation of Hawaii and really all indigenous. And actually, Chinese were not indigenous, but we have trauma also. But how did we talk them through this stage of not opening up every meeting, talking about the past trauma and leaping to the future? Do you want to talk about that more on a mystical level?
Yeah. So I must, as a caveat, I worked with the individual members of the leadership and their families to help them have stages of catharsis and to experience more of their most essential nature. But once that happened, what I explained is that often, and as well in I come from the Israelite heritage, and we have a lot of trauma as well. In many traditions where there's been trauma, when they relate to the ancients or to their heritage, they're relating to it through the lens of trauma. So they're not even remembering their ancestors, how they were before trauma. The trauma is intermixed in the transmission, in the messaging of how all is being interpreted. And that trauma is hardening. It dulls our senses. So what I explain to the leadership is that as you open your heart to feel pride and joy and sensations of togetherness with your grandchildren, with the eminence of your great-grandchildren, because their enlightenment will be at a higher octave, a higher vibration. When you connect with pride to their fulfillment, then they will do the work for you. They will connect the bridge to your ancestors, the true tradition of your ancestors. And what the head of state related to me is that when he started to practice this discipline, his ancestors, who used to come to him in dreams, they would come to him in his waking state. And they would share with him technique of how they used to work the land, of all these subtle traditions for managing community, that the dreaming while awake began to happen again as you restored the continuity to the future fulfillment. The future ancestry, you are their ancestors. The future descendants, their enlightenment will repair the circuit, the pure lens to the ancients that came before. In this way, you restore the wholeness that Sky is talking about, the circulatory system of continuity and awareness in a healthy way.
So Brian, I'm just going to say this in some other words also, just to try and understand it in a different way. So it's really important that the Hawaiians were able to go back and establish flow, the closed circuit, bypassing the trauma of recent years to the ancient times when they were thriving in a system called ahupua'a, basically stewarding the land instead of owning the land, stewarding the natural abundance from mountain to sea, top of the mountain to sea. And so they're able to then close a circuit, which means the electricity can then run around, right, instead of an open circuit. They were able to bridge the ancient thriving times with the future thriving descendants, right? And so that gives us the pathway, the shortest pathway that we can execute on now. So this is huge. And this is actually what happened in China as well. Because the museums that I showed you earlier, the urban planning museums, essentially every single one of them, the museums are like pieces of art themselves. And they hold at any one point this diorama for what the future is going to look like for the city in about 20 years. And so this is why China has been able to move forward harmoniously, is that they don't get stuck grieving about the past, because they have grieved. They were able to, and I think that's my second point. Actually, sorry, there we go. My second point is that this grieving ceremony is really important for us to close the circuit, to have the circulatory flow. So the release of this energy through a grieving ceremony. And I think it's a couple, Dave Some in Burkina Faso, that has this grieving ceremony that I did in Hawaii with a woman named Darshan Mendoza, that I think every single society needs to adapt some version of. And I think Jewish people have this grieving ceremony when somebody transitions, but for any type of thing, whether it's a tornado flattens your village, a society needs to go through a collective grieving ceremony for, number one, for us to bond over something that's common, to mark the end of the end, right? And then the beginning of the beginning, and then be able to release the obstacles to allow us to close the circuit that Sky talks about wholeness, Brian talks about circulatory flow. And then that is when all of these shortcuts will just sort of appear as signals, if you want to call them signals, wings from the universe, I like to call it, synchronicities. They'll appear in the present now, in hypnagogic states, is usually when I get them. And then that will give you a shortcut to the future that you can then take to society to execute on in the present now. Hopefully that made sense.
That's exactly,
Sky.
you just connected the dots for me, that I see synchronicities as a bridge to the future. They're showing, it's life showing us what you can do next to get where you're trying to get to. This is the person you need to talk to get where you need to get to, or this is the job opportunity that you need to work on in order to get where you in your heart are trying to get to. So I just love that you helped me make that connection of the way that I think about synchronicity in this process. Now, I want to invite other folks in the room to ask some questions, because I know both Peggy and Brian and I want to know what's on your heart, what's on your mind, what's striking you, what your questions are. So we just have a few more minutes, really, and we're going to probably extend by a little bit, but we want to keep it nice and tight here. So if you have a question or a comment that's short, we'd love to get your voice in this space. Would anybody like to raise their hand?
By the way, I see in the chat, a lot of people are wondering how to follow up with Brian. And if you have the opportunity, I highly recommend booking a session with him privately. He works from Canada, but he works remotely. I literally work with him daily to sort of accelerate my ability to see. And I know Kristen here in the audience has been working with him regularly as well, but Brian is unlike anybody else in that he not only is a very conscious channeler of direct information from source, but he's able to help you literally shift your karma, clear the karma, and then help like nudge you, put a hand behind your back and push you forward faster. So helium.care.
Let's and we've got that in the link in the chat, so you can find Brian on Clubhouse, on his website helium.care, and also on Instagram. Let's go to Pan and then to Rebecca.
Oh, thanks, Sky. I'm so glad I'm here.
Good to see you.
My experience is this group of people, these people who are talking to us, I feel like I'm at home, that I have found people who see the world the way that I see it and the possibilities. And I'm really blown away by what Peggy has been able to accomplish. And I resonate a lot with what Brian is able to experience in his consciousness. The idea that we can transition from our disconnected, greedy, wasteful culture to one that really supports life quickly because of the physics of it and because of the consciousness of it fills me with enormous hope. I'm 74 years old. I'm kind of running out of time in some level, and that to be able to see people that are coming along with incredible insights, how life can be so much more life-serving, and the science between showing us how we can go towards the future that we want. And
I know, Pan, that you do great work with nonviolent communication, and you helped me learn some of the tools of Marshall Rosenberg.
I love nonviolent communication, and you're just getting started. I have to tell you this really amazing story. My dad is in his 80s, and he had a lot of hip issues. He really needed hip surgery, but he didn't get it. So now he's just suffering through it. And so I brought him to Brian. And my dad is really unique. He's the one who brought me into this Qigong practice. My grandfather on my dad's side was a Taoist grandmaster.
Oh, wow.
And so he has really been focused on business, but really his heart is yearning to seek knowledge.
That's awesome.
And so every week almost for the last month, we've been having a session with my dad, and Brian has been channeling for him and healing his hips and his legs and everything, which is a miracle in itself. But
Uh-huh.
what really made me cry is my dad in his 80s now is sort of like seeing these aha moments of
Yeah.
how reality works.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think like if everybody here could just be more vocal and normalize these concepts in business or whatever regular community, quote unquote,
Yeah.
regular community that they're in, I think people, I asked Brian, what does enlightenment mean for humanity? Like, what does that mean exactly? And he said, it's a state where everybody is more sensitive to the invisible vibrations, dynamics, the emotional web that we weave. And if we can help people experience this
Yes.
web,
Uh-huh.
then, everybody can be young forever, Pam.
I really appreciate what you're saying, Peggy. When I was a stockbroker with Merrill Lynch, they told us as a financial planner to expect people my age and younger to live to be 120. And as I get closer to that, I see people who are vibrant and alive and contributing and growing, even though they are at an age when I was in my 20s, thought was 2 steps away from death.
Pan,
Yeah.
Pan, it's so fantastic to see you here. Thank you for the training you've helped me with nonviolent communication and doing that work. It's so important. And let's get Rebecca in here too. You able to unmute? And then we'll go to
Hi.
Ellen.
Hi, thank you so much. This is really interesting. And it's fascinating to think about releasing trauma and the somatic experience, both from the body and as a culture and as a collection of cultures. So thank you for bringing that idea into my head. So I guess this is a question specifically for Brian. If we have a future self, is it one self? And if so, can we communicate with our future self? And it doesn't mean verbal communication necessarily, though it could. It could also be visions, etc.
Thank you. This is a bit of a passion project for me. This is one of the themes that I speak to people from around the world about, is that we are made from the substance of eternity. We are a circulatory system of eternal consciousness. When there's synchronicity, it means the circuit is open. There's continuity to the future self. And when there's continuity to the future self, there's a future self that wants to seed your awareness to be it sooner. So most definitely, most of the work that I thrive at teaching people who are very well balanced and successful is about how to upgrade 2 more gears, to release that inner genius. And that requires an optimization of really reinterpreting what true courage is. That courage is not hiding behind walls or being behind steel, but you were born courageous. That dot of awareness is so light. That inner child is so full of wonder. And it was so sensitive. And that sensitivity is a radar detector. It's not a liability. And we are trained to stamp out that sensitivity. But that sensitivity is what we need to restore true heart coherence, to be able to feel inherent truth, what you're talking about. Not necessarily to dialogue, but to feel inherent truth. The reason why the environment is suffering is because we're learning deductively about our interconnectivity with nature. But if we restore our sensitivity, then we feel inherent truth, that we don't have to learn from the mishaps, but we can elegantly find synergy and wholeness with the fractal nature of our existence, as Sky is talking about.
So beautiful. Thank you. Let's go to Ellen. Helen, did I say your name right? Breton? Elaine? Can you unmute? So we are coming to the end of the time that we set aside.
I'm sorry, this is Elan. It wasn't letting me unmute. I couldn't.
There we go. You're here. Good to see you.
Yeah, hi. So yeah, good to see you. So I know Sky from Common Cause, so I'm just gonna say that because, I'm very passionate politically, and I guess, I'm really glad to hear that China and, other countries with money are starting to look at how to help us save the environment. Knowing that not as much China, but a lot of those countries help to destroy it. But we talked about trauma tonight and other things. And I guess I wonder, how do we balance this? Because, countries, people can both cause trauma and try to heal other areas at the same time. And I know that there's a lot of still trauma happening with, say, the Uyghur population and other things in China. So I guess I'm asking about the balance, like balancing ourselves individually and as communities and as nations of both causing and fixing or healing trauma and global warming and climate change and just racial tensions simultaneously. So I guess that's my thought. That's what sparked my curiosity, and I'm just kind of throwing that out there as an idea if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you,
think
Elaine.
it's hard because there's very few people have context about what's happening in Xinjiang with Uyghurs. So I'll give a similar example, which is closer to home, which I think everybody has seen a lot of, which is Navajo. So Brian and I also work with the Navajo Nation. And, they would say that there's still genocide going on right now through the lack of resources and lack of attention being given to them. So one of the interesting things that we ran into as an obstacle there was when we tried to do these workshops of dreaming what the future could look like in the Navajo Nation, which is also a sovereign nation. The person leading it, a lot of you on Clubhouse may have heard him speak, Kevin Martin. He said that the biggest challenge was that people were so beaten up through history of this trauma that everybody's familiar with, that they forgot how to dream. So, again, my work is about dreaming in the future in detail. And they forgot how to dream. They're afraid to dream. They don't think anybody's going to listen to their dream. They're traumatized just trying to dream. And so I would say the first thing is just to provide a safe space with techniques like nonviolent communication, just generally how to hold space, the sort of shaman way, to allow kids to dream as they did when they were a child, unfettered dreaming with euphoria and joy, like be Willy Wonka creating the chocolate factory. If we can gift that to the inner child of people, that would do a lot towards resolving this trauma and bringing in the future faster. Brian, did you have something to say, Ed?
That was lovely. Ostensibly, what I would give an analogy would be in the wine industry. They try to teach people how to appreciate fine wine. Many people prefer sweetened wines. When they train them to enjoy finer wines, they say, you need to lay off the sugar, reduce sugar by 80% for a month. What you felt was dry is actually quite sweet, nuanced with flavors, but you've desensitized your palate through traumatizing it with so much sugar. What we have here, essentially, universally throughout the world, is people that have been desensitized from inherent truth. As we restore respect for the sensitivity of hearts, to inculcate those hearts with courage, then they begin not just to dream while asleep, they dream while awake. And that dreaming while awake will guide them to the most direct outcome of synchronicity and synergy. So I am looking forward to working in person with Kevin and his family And working with them like I did with the Hawaiian leadership, because like many indigenous peoples, the traumas are very severe. But what I've learned from my own background, I grew up with most of my relatives being lost in World War II, and the traumas that resulted in the fallout of escaping Europe. What I've noticed is that the venom of the oppressor is intermixed in the system of the body's awareness. So the trauma repeats itself. The body's always in an allergic state and reacting. You cannot create with the future without extracting the trauma they're creating with. And what that requires is to restore the bravery and the courage to create again with the true self, to be able to feel and gradually reharmonize the ability to feel inherent truth again. And that is an eventuality that will visit all peoples of this world. It's just a matter of time and how fast we're ready to get there.
So here we are in this space that we've created together, all of us, and we're being inspired by the way to have insight into our world that's beyond what we previously had. When we have that insight, it can blow our mind open to new levels of realization of what's possible. So there's this really important aspect of aletheia, of having a breakthrough of awareness that can help us dream bigger and dream from the future instead of hold on to the trauma of the past. I'd like to offer one more piece of content from physics, or from my work, which is maybe trying to build the physics of this. And I'd like us to close the circle tonight in the next few minutes. And Brian and Peggy, once I'm done with this little piece, will you share a little bit about where you're going and how people can engage with you, what you'd like out of the next steps? Does that sound like the right way to close?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to put out this idea of symbolic momentum. Momentum in physics is the notion that once something gets moving, it keeps moving. And if you push it faster, it holds on to that energy that it turns into, it's called momentum, holds on to the momentum, and it keeps moving in that direction. In a similar way, if you think of your multiverse as an apple tree, and you're climbing that apple tree, moving along the branches towards the apples are the intentions that you have to experience the world a certain way, experience your life a certain way. And when you get closer to those apples, you build momentum. You get more density of apples around you because you've gotten closer to where the apples are. And the tree just keeps expanding in front of you, right? Because time doesn't stop. So there's this endless growth of branches above you with new apples, but you increase the density of those apples because you get closer to the branches that have apples and away from the branches that don't have apples. What I'm saying is that by choosing to live in alignment with the intentions that you have, by acting in alignment between your intentions and your actions, you get closer to the vision that you have for your life. And the synchronicities are more likely to happen. And so in answer to the question that I think Elaine had, what I would say is that we can also, the balance between building the future that we want and recreating the past that we don't want is a balance. And what we have to do is shift it so it's more the creation of the future we do want than creating more harm. So we just shift that balance, and as we get to be balanced more towards the future we do want, we will gradually come to build that momentum. So that's sort of the physics angle on where balance comes in, and maybe that visual will help.
You know, I'm going to add another visual too on the backs of that. And I think one of the important things that I'm trying to teach my kids is that we are intentionally or unintentionally creating the world that we live in, our reality at any moment, just by where we put our attention. So just like quantum physics talks about, like, you know, we're the observer and then we affect the particle, et cetera. So that's, I think, a really big assumption in terms of why it's important to be mindful of where you put your thoughts. So for me, everything is energy. Thoughts are waveforms. Your emotions are waveforms. For those of you who are sort of Joe Dispenza followers, I like to quote how the heart is, I think, 5,000 times stronger magnetic force, 100 times stronger electric force than the brain. So your emotions actually are stronger than your thoughts.
I think
and
you
then
just made Fiorella very happy.
And then your thoughts are actions as well. So for me, I used to play with something called an oscilloscope in my first electrical engineer class at MIT. Is this machine, and you can choose the dial and like it'll play with the waves. And so for me, I see the world, everything as waveforms. And when you are interacting with people, you're either in alignment or you're skew to somebody else's waves, right? And so your whole job is to try and align all the waves in your sort of reality together. And that means like your divine trinity of thoughts, feelings, actions from you need to be aligned. They can't be, you're speaking something and feeling another. And then the people that you surround yourself with, hopefully they're also aligned. And so what happens is you get waves in an ocean. If they're going in the same direction at the same pace, same frequency, then you start to get like a tsunami, right? Versus a standing wave where they cancel each other out. And so life is about building a tsunami, and a tornado is essentially a spiral tsunami.
Yeah, I was going to say something like that. Yeah.
Right. But
I
the
see the
interesting thing about
between-
waves is it actually doesn't go like this. Waves go like this.
Right.
Right. They're in circles and they just keep moving out.
Right.
And so what happens is when you have a tsunami, the crest of the wave, the top of the wave that you see from far away gets taller and taller, higher and higher, more and more visible. So for me, synchronicities are those winks from the universe that are the crests of the waves that are more and more visible. The more aligned you are, the more you're able to align all the energy waves in your field. Was that just like a bunch of words that were too fast?
That was good. And we're going to take right there. That's a good place to leave people.
Awesome.
That tsunami is what we're trying to build. And it's a tornado, it's a tsunami, it's Mother Nature coming back to influence our thinking and our feeling and our dreaming so that we can create with her power. So how can people follow up with you? I know that Peggy and Brian, one thing you'd like to do is find funding to sponsor scholarships for people to do this kind of studying and research and be activists. Can you say just a minute about that?
Yeah, my vision is that, like an avatar can affect 1 billion people, right? What we want to do is find 100 people that really understand what Brian's talking about, what I'm talking about, gift them with this understanding of how the reality works and then how to apply it to their own communities. And that will have a massive ripple effect through humanity. You don't need to start with everybody or even a majority. You just need 100 people for 3 years to train with us. So sort of my dream wish is to find companies, philanthropists, donors to do scholarships where people can live for 3 years, just working with us to learn these concepts and applying it to communities like the nation of Hawaii or the local communities, the local countries. Because what we're talking about is just the tip of a tsunami of a lot of very nuanced stuff that takes a long time to explain. So anyway, you can reach me at Shanghai Peggy on pretty much any social media. I tend to blog more on Facebook, long form. So you can find me at Shanghai Peggy, one word. That's normally where I reside. And then Brian, www.heliumcare, not .com, is in the chat. So you can book a healing with him there.
Helium is spelled HEALUM. So
yeah.
There is a quotient that I would like to put forward. When we focus on spirituality, traditionally, we try to focus on transcending bad karma. What Peggy and I are here to do in the world right now is as well to retrofit existing systems with new technology. with new inspiration, of how to create with pure karma, of how to create with our future karma, our future outcome, our future merit, to turn from a fatalistic system into what I call the arrow of destiny, which is the boundless you, the present inner child you, connecting to the future you. It creates a triad of pure karma that is the most direct, synchronistic pathway for you. And what Sky explained in wholeness and synergy is that we are all connected. And as you get more direct, that music gets louder for everyone else to get in the passing lane, to create a carpool lane for everyone to get to the future faster, better future, fastest, Peggy.
And, you know, what I'm walking away with, the feeling in my body is that this is the resonance, this is the inspiration, this is the knowing that we're all seeking to walk away with our conversations. We want to walk away with this sense of, oh, we're creating something here. Not we're patching up the past, but we're creating something. And that creation takes stepping away from what we know to be true, what we can see in our heads, and dreaming something that we haven't yet experienced, or bringing together the experiences we have had that we want to recreate, like awe and wonder and joy. So I am so grateful for Peggy and Brian, what you bring. I'm grateful that you have reminded, I think, a lot of us that the vision that we each carry is shared, and that we have the capacity to make that the dominant vision. I don't even like that word dominant, but the most influential vision, the one that carries the most force of the tsunami. And don't forget, don't lose track of that power that comes when we embrace the inspiration inside each of us. And synchronicity is this tool that you can use in your life to embrace your inner motivation, to inspire you. It's the relationship you have to the world around you and to change. So notice how synchronicity this week, this month, in the next couple of weeks, notice the events of your life. What's happening in your life already? You don't have to look for synchronicity. It's already there. Notice what's happening already on your calendar, and look for, what is the intent of this event for me? What do I want from this experience? And how do I frame this experience? How do I show up in this experience as a synchronicity leading to the future I want to create, the one that I'm dreaming of? So that you can see, each of us can see that synchronicity is everything that happens. We are not ever separate from synchronicity. We are immersed in a flow of that tidal wave or that tornado. And it's what we bring forward that powers that tornado. So thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Sky. It's always great to talk to you. And it's amazing how we just met in Clubhouse and it's just like grown from there.
Yes.
A bunch of people here. George Noble, I think you pasted actually a bunch of messages that went to me directly versus I think you meant to paste it into the everyone. So just wanted to
I'm going to
acknowledge
save the
that.
chat, and hopefully I'll be able to access that. Although I'm not sure if it was private. Yeah, George, reach out to me with any comments you want to share with everyone here. It's good to see you here.
Thanks, everybody. I hope that was inspiring. And yeah, I think this is a framework for how to innovate, not just our technology, but humanity itself, which is very exciting to me. So glad to be a part of it with you, Brian and Sky.
And I want to thank Fiorella Oldani for helping hold this together and responding to people in the chat and all the support you give to me and my team. So thank you, Fiorella. Brian, Peggy, great to see you.
Thank you, Sky. Thank you, Peggy.
Everyone stay in touch. We'll keep doing more stuff. You got the links, synchronicityinstitute.com. You can find out more about what's going on event-wise, and stay in touch with me and Peggy and Brian. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
Sky. Thank you so much, Peggy.
Here's a sound to ring us out.